Likutei Sichos, Chelik Chavav, volume 26, the second Sicha for Parshas Mishpatim. This Sicha will explain the chronological order of the two parashas, Yisroi and Mishpatim, and beyond, and also it will describe and highlight the two aspects of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. So as an introduction, let's just get a general overview of these parashas. That is, in Parshas Yisroi, there it's described everything that took place from when they arrived to Midbar Sinai, to the desert of Sinai, and of course, the appearance of Hashem on Har Sinai and the delivery of the Ten Commandments. In Parshas Mishpatim, our current Parsha, the Torah describes in great detail various laws, dinim, mostly pertaining to money matters and damages, day-to-day laws that need to be followed and observed as Jews. At the end of the Parsha, and this is the focus of the Sicha, it describes there, it says that Hashem said to Moshe, come up to the mountain, and it goes into the narrative of how they prepared for Matan Torah, how the Yidden accept upon themselves, and they said, Nasa v'nishma, we will do and we will listen, and how they came into the covenant with Hashem. After Parshas Mishpatim, we have Parshas Truma and Tetzaveh. In Truma Tetzaveh, it describes the command and the details of the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the first temple. And then, in Parshas Kisisa, following that, it describes the unfortunate events of the golden calf and what happened as a result. Another thing to be familiar with is the rule, we know the rule in the Torah, and Rashi quotes it several times, Ein muktam u'ma'uchar b'Torah. Literally translated, there's no early, there's no late in the Torah, meaning that the order as things appear in the narrative in the Torah are not absolutely chronologically correct. Sometimes we find, and sometimes it's so clear and obvious, that we have no choice but to say that this event that appears here actually happened a while back, meaning prior to an event that already has been described in the narrative, or perhaps it's going to happen much later. Of course, like everything in the Torah, everything has a reason. And obviously, when the Torah shows, when Hashem chooses to tell us something, to give us a narrative in the Torah which is not chronologically correct, there has to be a reason for it. Another thing to be familiar with in there that we well know, in the rules of Rashi, that also the Dibur HaMaschil, also the heading in Rashi is very, very accurate. In fact, when one studies, one examines the exact words which Rashi chose to quote from the Pasuk and to address, one has a better insight and a better appreciation of what Rashi is trying to tell us. Finally, the Medrash, the well-known Medrash, that describes what exactly took place at Matan Torah. In other words, what was accomplished, what happened. And the Medrash tells us that prior to Matan Torah, there was a gzeira, a decree, or a divide, that Elyonim, higher ones, meaning the spiritual realm, lo yerdu letachtonim, should not come down to the lower ones, to the lower realm, to the material. That means the material and the spiritual were not to mix. And now by Matan Torah, when Hashem gave the Torah, Hashem abolished this decree. He took away this divide. In fact, what happens? It says, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. Hashem came down. With this, he set into the motion this abolishing of this decree. He came down. The Elyonim came down to Tachtonim, and now we're meant, the Tachtonim, to always constantly rise, go towards the Elyonim. Let's get into the Sicha. So as we said in the introduction, in the end of the Parsha, it says, in the beginning of chapter 24, it says, Ve'el Moshe Omar Alei El Hashem. And to Moshe he said, who of course Hashem said, Alei, come up to Hashem. Rashi quotes these words, Ve'el Moshe Omar Alei. And to Moshe he said, go up. And he explains, this Parsha was said prior to the Ten Commandments And specifically on the 4th of Sivan was said to him, come up to Hashem. Now, there are other commentaries on the Torah, commentaries which are Pashtane HaMikra. That means they go according to the Pshat, similar to Rashi, not exclusively like Rashi. For example, the Ramban, the Even Ezra, the Barbanel, the Orachaim, that they maintain that this narrative of El Moshe Amar Alei, that he said to Moshe, come up, indeed happened after Matan Torah, not on the 4th of Sivan, but after Hashem had said to him all the various mitzvahs. Hashem says to him, come up, and I'm going to give you more. That's how they maintain. But Rashi maintains, as we just said, that this indeed occurred on the 4th of Sivan, prior to the giving of the Torah. So here comes all the questions. Number one, it's obvious that if this occurred before Matan Torah, then the narrative, meaning the chronological order here, is totally out of whack. It's not correct. It's not right. If this happened before Matan Torah, why is the Torah quoting it here? Now, there is reason to learn like Rashi, because from the actual description of what takes place here, when Moshe comes back down and Moshe delivers the message to the Bnei Yisrael, and they say Nasav and Ishmael, we know that happened before Matan Torah. And then also the actual wording of when it says Ve'el Moshe Amar Alei versus Vayomer Hashem El Moshe Alei, it seems that it's talking about something that happened in the past, not that it's happening now in the narrative. But still, there are many questions. As we said, number one, true that this is a fundamental rule that Ein Muktam Ma'uchar B'Torah, that the order in the Torah is not necessarily chronologically correct, but this we only say when it's absolutely compelling to do so. Because really that's not normal. It's not natural. Really, it doesn't make sense. And unless there's a compelling reason, we don't say so. Why does Rashi, so to speak, force himself to say it here? What is the reason why we cannot explain it like the other commentaries do? And also, if you think about it, this makes the whole narrative highly distorted. It turns it into very, so to speak, difficult to understand. Why? Because in Parshas Yisro, it turns out it spoke about the 1st of Sivan as they arrived in Mount Sinai, and the 2nd, then the 3rd, then even a part of the 4th. Then, of course, it describes in full detail, in full glory, what happened on the 6th of Sivan, which is, of course, the actual appearance of Hashem on Mount Sinai, the delivery of the 10 Commandments. And now it seems to be jumping back to the 4th of Sivan, that the sequence is totally out of whack. Moreover, if we were to explain it like the other commentaries, everything makes sense. There was the beginning of Matan Torah, then he goes up to the mountain, and then he tells him everything, all the laws that Hashem told him to describe to them. But according to Rashi, it's all mixed up. First they receive the Torah, then in the course of 40 days, according to Rashi, Hashem teaches him the whole Parshas Mishpatim, and now after all of that, we go back to talking about what happened before. It doesn't make sense, or it doesn't seem to make sense. Another question, of course, why in the Dibur HaMaschil, in the heading, does Rashi choose the 4 words, Ve'el Moshe Omar Alei? And to Moshe he said, Alei, go up. Why couldn't Rashi just write as a heading, Ve'el Moshe Omar, and he spoke to Moshe, which obviously includes the entire narrative? Why does he include in the heading the word Alei, go up? And finally, in the actual words of Rashi, where Rashi explains, he answers the question, what does he say? Oh, this happened before the 10 Commandments. This is an unusual expression. Why didn't Rashi just say, this happened before Matan Torah, which would be more typical? The answer in all of this is if we get a perspective of what really occurred, what was accomplished by Matan Torah. And the Rebbe says that there were 2 things, there are 2 aspects to Matan Torah. Number one, Hashem gave us the Torah, meaning all the mitzvahs, all the commandments, all the laws, and so on. Number two, that we became Avdei Hashem. We became the servants of Hashem, as already was told to us in the beginning before we even left Mitzrayim. Tavdu es Elokim ala har hazeh. And Rashi says, what does that mean? That you're going to worship Hashem, you're going to serve Hashem on this mountain? Shetiyu mishubadim li, that you should become subservient to me. So these two things happened by Matan Torah, and they are stressed, they are emphasized, that is, in Parashas Yisro. Right in the beginning, when Hashem says, so you should look in chapter 19, verse 3, this is what you should say to the Yidden, that you saw all the miracles that happened, all the wonders that I did for you. And then he says, V'ata im shomoya tishmu b'koili. And now if you will listen, you will you will heed to my words. What is that? That's the fulfillment of the mitzvahs. And then he continues, Ushmartem es birisi. And you should safeguard my covenant. What is that? That's a second aspect, to be Hashem's servants, to be subservient to him. These two things are reflected respectively in the narratives of Yisro and Mishpatim. In Yisro, Parshas Yisro, last week's Parsha, it speaks mainly about the 10 Commandments. It speaks mainly about the delivery of the mitzvahs. Here, at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, it focuses on the second aspect, this covenant that they made, the Nasa v'Nishma, the total subservience to Hashem. And now, then the order of the narratives makes perfect sense. If we now look at it from this perspective, from this prism, we look at Yisro and Mishpatim, the breakdown of the narrative makes absolute sense and it's understood 100%. In Yisro, it describes the delivery, the initial delivery of all the mitzvahs, Taseres HaDibros. Then in Parshas Mishpatim, after it completes the whole list, the listing that is, of all the mitzvahs, of all the halachas that were delivered at that time, then it goes back to Matan Torah to tell us now the second aspect. Once it finishes and completes totally addressing and describing the first aspect of Matan Torah, namely the mitzvahs, now it goes back to the second aspect, which is that commitment and subservience to Hashem. And now we can appreciate very much why Rashi includes the word alei, go up, in the heading of the Rashi. Because with this, Rashi emphasizes that over here, the focus is on the second aspect of the elevation. After describing to us the Taseres HaDibros and all the mitzvahs and the laws that come with it, Hashem says to Moshe, alei, go up. This is another type of elevation to Hashem. This is to become bound, to connected with Hashem, a totally different aspect of Matan Torah. Also, this can help clarify another thing, which is post Parshas Mishpatim, and that is Parshas Teruma, Tetzaveh, and Kisisa. Because if you think about it, when we learn Parshas Teruma, Tetzaveh, we're learning about the commandment and the description, all of the details and dimensions of the construction of the Mishkan, of the Osuli Mikdash V'Shachanti B'Soichem, that Hashem says that you should build for me a dwelling, a holy place, a temple, a tabernacle. Now, according to Rashi's Shita, according to Rashi's opinion, when was Parshas Teruma? When was Parshas Teruma Tetzaveh said? In other words, when was the commandment given to build this Mikdash, to build this sanctuary? It was after they sinned with the golden calf. It was after Chet HaEgel. But this puts the whole thing into question. It doesn't make sense. Because Teruma and Tetzaveh, if that describes something that happened after the Egel, after the sin of the golden calf, how come only in Parshas Kisisa does the Torah teach us, does the Torah share with us the narrative, the sad narrative of the golden calf? But now that we explained the actual order and the two aspects, and therefore the order of Parshas Yisro and the end of Mishpatim and how it all makes sense, we can appreciate why there too, in Truma Tetzaveh and Kisisa, Hashem, so to speak, puts it out of order, and once again, a muktam u'm'uchem b'Torah. Why? Because since over here the focus is on the second aspect of Matan Torah, which is to be bound with Hashem, to be totally and absolutely connected to Hashem, to the point of total and absolute subservience, which is the Krisus Bris, this is the covenant. So this gets fully expressed in the ultimate manner in the construction of the Mishkan. Because what is the purpose of the Mishkan, as we said? V'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'soichem. I will dwell with them, I will dwell amongst them, there will be a total and absolute connection. Now everything makes sense. The order of Yisro, Mishpatim, the end of Mishpatim, Truma Tetzaveh, and then Kisisa, everything makes sense. Says the Rebbe, to explain this, to appreciate this on a more esoteric level, from a Hasidic perspective, we know that the Medrash tells us that what was accomplished by Matan Torah was the abolishment of the decree, and therefore now Hashem says, Elyonim yerdu letachtoinim, meaning the upper ones, the higher ones will go to the lower ones, meaning the spiritual aspect of things will now lower itself down into the world. And then the second part of it is tachtoinim yalu le'elyonim, that the lower ones will go up to the upper ones. The breakdown works out in the following manner. In Parshas Yisro, mainly the focus is about elyonim yerdu letachtoinim, how the upper ones go down to the lower ones. And you see that clearly expressed in the words Vayeded Hashem al Har Sinai, that Hashem went down to Mount Sinai and then gave us, dictated to us, told us, commanded us all the various dinim. In our parsha, after it goes through all the details, all the various laws that are told to us in the phase of the aspect of Elyonim Yerdu Letachtoinim, now it goes back to the second aspect, which is Tachtoinim Ya'lu Elyonim, that the lower ones will be elevated and ascend higher and higher, going towards the Elyonim. And immediately after that, he continues the narrative with the building of the Mishkan. Why? Because there's an inherent difference between what happened in Parshas Yisro and what is described here at the end of Parshas Mishpatim. Elyonim yerdu letachtoinim, although it was a tremendous and great revelation, in fact it was so intense, but yet it was only temporary. It doesn't continue to happen all the time. And therefore, for example, an expression of this is we find that even if somebody should locate, and with absolute certainty, the place on which Hashem came down and gave the Torah, you can touch it. There's absolutely no holiness in it, because there was no permanence to it. It was only temporary. Whereas the second aspect, which is Tachtoinim Yalu Le'elyonim, that the lower ones will go up to the higher ones, this is something which is permanent and constant, and in fact, the effect of it is permanent. That although it's gradual, but since it's a constant alay, a constant elevation, a constant ascent, this affects a permanence that the Shekhinah stays down here forever and permanently, and this is something which is especially appreciated when we know, for example, in the Beis Hamikdash, with the Beis Hamikdash stood, the ultimate V'asu li mikdash shechantim b'soicham, on top of Temple Mount, the holiness is still there.